Fiona said the Education Act isn't changing. In fact, it is. This is the Education Act, and there is currently a bill before Parliament which has had its first reading called the Education VET, Vocational Education Training Reform Bill, and it's at select committee stage, and I know that Sam has presented at select committee, other people are. I'm presenting next week, and then the government will carry on doing whatever it was going to do, having listened to us, and it will go to its second reading in February next year and will be enacted in March next year. So what is this thing? This minister is the first minister I can remember for a long time who has taken the whole education portfolio, from early childhood education to tertiary education, and is changing everything in that whole lineup. And he's got his mother is an educational theorist, if you aren't familiar with that, and I think they've had a few chats around the breakfast table. He's got a very clear view on where he wants to take this, and nothing is standing in his way. So in terms of vocational education, which is what these ROVE reforms about, reform of vocational education, there are 7 things happening. First is this creation of workforce development councils, of which he says there will be 4 to 7, and that's the first decision that he is going to make, and that will be announced before Christmas. We'll have a look at those in a minute. There'll be regional skills leadership groups advising on what skills are needed in the regions and various industries. He's just announced that MB and MSD are going to coordinate those, and they're going to use existing groups wherever possible so they don't have to create new ones. Those in the know will have seen that announcement. He's going to establish this group called Te Taumata Aranui, which is a group of Maori thought leaders who are going to advise the government on how they can adhere to Maori Crown partnerships, sort of treaty principles. This group isn't in the legislation, so there is no requirement to have this group in the future. It could be taken off at the stroke of a pen. So there's actually not a lot of commitment to that, which is quite interesting. It's going to create this New Zealand Institute of Skills and Technology, and some people see this as the current 16 polytechs being joined and relabelled under one umbrella. If you listen to the officials, it's a network of delivery across New Zealand. So forget the existing polytechs. There will be one centralised institute with a network of delivery arms which may use existing polytech facilities, or it might use private training establishments to augment that, but they will control this whole system and make it anyone, anywhere, able to access whatever training they need wherever they are in New Zealand. That's the vision. And you know that polytechs are going down the gurgler at the moment, and this is one way of rationalising that, trying to make it more effective and efficient. The fact that they've been underfunded for some time is one of the problems, but anyway, I'm not here to support them. Next thing they're going to do is shift workplace learning. So currently ITOs, and there are 11 of them, have 2 roles. Two mandated roles. One, they work out what industry needs in terms of skills standards and qualifications, and secondly, they deliver those to people in employment or in employment-like situations, which we call volunteers. And we do those 2 things, and we're only funded for the second one. So we're funded as an ITO currently for the bums on seats, how many people we facilitate that training for, and from that bulk funding basically we have to do the qual development. That on-job delivery is being incorporated with this networked institute, and they will do all delivery for people in employment and people who are pre or job transitioner, which is the typical ITP role. So theoretically it's going to be easier whether you are in work or out of work or young person or whatever to get your training, because there'll be this massive network of delivery that you can access anywhere, and you'll know where you are in that qualification no matter where, and move around, and it'll be seamless and beautiful. So that's what's happening under that bullet point. There are going to be these centres of vocational excellence which look at innovative ways in research in certain industry groupings, and the first two off the rank are what are called the critical industries for New Zealand. It's not the outdoors, it's construction and primary industries, right? Farming and construction. They're the ones that get all the press. We are, what was that outdoors thing again? We'll find out about that. And there's going to be a new funding system, so no matter who delivers the training, the funding will be equitable, because there'll only be one trainer anyway, right? Plus some PTEs. Watch this space. And the wānanga. There are 3 wānanga who will get funded, and they're actually cutting their own deal behind the scenes. Right, so that's what's going to happen, and here's the timeline for the changes. So we're here. Now the first thing that the Minister, so you see the bill submissions are closed and we're at select committee, and the bill is going to come into effect on the 1st of April 2020. So we're at this stage, and the Workforce Development Council coverage, that 4 to 7 of these new entities that do the standard setting, is going to be notified before Christmas, and then you'll have to, those new Workforce Development Councils can be stood up, come into creation between 1st of April next year, and they all have to be in operation by June of the following year. So ITOs on April 1 lose all of their mandate on April 1. In a microsecond later, by virtue of amazing legislation, they become a new entity called a TITO, a transitional ITO, and they get all those powers back, but they've got new rules associated with them. It's interesting, the word TITO in Māori means liar, which we find quite amusing. So on that date, we have to, as an ITO, develop a transition plan to transition our standard setting role to one or more of these new WDCs and pass it over. And we have to work out a plan that's agreed by the Minister to transition all of the work we do in terms of delivery to on-job and volunteers to providers, whether that be the new institute, PTEs or wānanga, or a mixture of those, by December 2022, because that's lights out. All make sense? So that's the world that we're operating in at the moment. It's quite a period of disruption. So first of all, those who don't know about these Workforce Development Councils, the first, and we've done 5 sessions around the country, and some people here sat through those and gave their input. The Minister says this whole system is going to work much better because it's going to be based on what industry want. And because the problem we've got now is we've got a whole bunch of people coming out of training, and they've paid a fortune for it, and they might have a student loan, and they go into industry, and industry say, you haven't got the skills we need, and we're going to have to retrain you, and it was a complete waste. So, who remembers TROC? Target Review of Qualifications, right? That was when we had, I don't know how many zillion qualifications, and we were told to reduce it to 30% of those, and we've just finished at Skills Active, right? And we've reduced ours by that amount, but that was about stopping this proliferation of qualifications where every provider could dream up their own qualification and put it on the framework, justify it, and say that the student and mum and dad and everyone else didn't know whether what they were doing was the same as everyone else. So what happened is we got together and decided what the qualifications industry wanted, and we put those on the framework, and then every provider ran away and developed their own program to get to that point, and no one knew what the outcome, whether the outcomes were comparable. So it moved the problem from qualification to program. This new system says everyone has to deliver the program developed by the Workforce Development Council, so that proliferation of programs should be gone. So the Workforce Development Council works with industry, works out the skills standards, works out the qualification, delivers a training package and the program that people have to deliver, whether you're the institute or a private training establishment. If you're the wānanga, you have special rules, special concessions, which is in the bill. So that's the deal. These WDCs are going to do that, and not only do that, they're going to moderate the outcomes. So they will go and look at the graduates of all of these different one program for each qualification, and check that they're getting the graduates that they want, and they all have the same skills and are work ready. And if the industry says that there should be a capstone assessment, which is like a little practical assessment to check that they've got work ready skills, think of a chef. You go into the kitchen and you watch them boil an egg and put it on a plate. Then the industry can say that's what we need to check, and that will happen. And they won't get the final qualification until they pass that capstone assessment. Does that make sense? Not only that, the WDC will be able to say, we've looked at provider Y, it's something called the Dive Academy in Palmerston North, and they're turning out really ratchet divers. It never happened. We'll be able to say to TEC in the future, you shouldn't be funding that outfit because they're turning out ratchet graduates, and that's never happened before. So that's the system if it all goes well. So where each industry fits in this grouping of WDCs, however many and whatever they're going to be, is up to that industry to decide within reason. We've talked through all of that stuff. The other big difference is ITOs at the moment industry owned. We're Skills Active is a limited liability company owned by shareholders. Some of the shareholders are here. The new organisation will be a quasi non-governmental organisation. The minister can start and stop them at the flick of a pen, and the industry doesn't own them. But the industry will have a governing board controlling them, who the minister can remove or add people to at the drop of a pen. There is a lot of power in this legislation around ministers' powers. So we've been going around the place saying there's a big decision to make about how many and what WDCs will be formed. Where do you guys, in terms of our industries, that's currently sport, fitness, recreation, outdoor recreation, snow sports, dive and performing arts, where do you think you should be? The Minister said 4 to 7. If there are 4, this is the groupings that they'd be. Green is about grass and growing stuff, so that's sheep and cows and processing them, and corn and seafood and all that stuff. That's the primary industries. Orange is construction infrastructure, that's building and services and power lines and whatever else you need, plumbing and electrical. That's all the stuff in there. And all the manufacturing in this 4 grouping. Social health and community services, that's all of your aged care workers and your primary care workers and community health and all that sort of stuff. Remember, this is predominantly levels 3 to 6 in the framework. It's pre-degree. So it's nothing to, if you've got universities aren't touched by this. Because if you go near the Vice-Chancellor's Committee, you're going to have your hands burnt even if you're the Minister.
And there's other legislation around the universities, isn't there?
Yeah, which is interesting that the Minister's taken everything except universities. That might be, if he gets back in, it might be his next thing. Service and creative industries, so that's retail, hospitality, tourism, and sport and recreation and exercise and everything else. So at the moment, if the Minister chooses 4 sectors, all of you will be in here. You're a small part of the service sector, along with creative as well, so that's dancers and performers and drama and what else is in there? Ballet and digital art and workshop, gaming, all that sort of stuff is in there, right? But by far the largest, 2 industries in there are retail and hospitality. 1.2 million of them. There's, at best count, next to nothing of you. All right. The Minister said our starting point will be the 6 vocational pathways which schools use through their record of achievement to each of the assessment standards and unit standards they do have got a colour associated with them, and so a child and their parents can look at a kid's record of achievement, looking at all the colours and how they add up. How many of you have been in to have a look at a record of achievement by vocational pathway? Oh, Fiona is. Right, so and you can see if you're accumulating lots of green ones, and that means you might be destined for a job in the primary industries, right? There were 5 originally. We've talked about primaries, we've talked about service, construction, infrastructure, manufacturing and technology is cut out. That's all of the factory, think people where you manufacture things. So, and there's this one which was added later because people in the creative industry said, hey, we don't really believe we're service when we're dancing and drawing and architects and all that sort of stuff. So they formed their own one. And if you look at the numbers, that's there. Total employment in each area, creative as it's defined there, is 51,000. And those who use level 3 to 6 qualifications, 21,000. Compare that with the largest group, which is the service industries, 853,000 utilising vocational qualifications. And the officials are saying, in terms of a workforce development council, it doesn't stack up to have one for a group of industries this size because they're insignificant. It's not worth funding. We'll chuck them in with the service industries. Does that make sense? So the ITOs, the 11 of them got together and said if there was a blank sheet of canvas, what would we suggest? And they suggested 7. They added this one called professional and ICT services. That's all the computing boffins and things, but it's also all of those things like real estate, accounting, financial services, all of those professions that go across many of these industries but aren't specifically industry related. And they said it makes sense to expand this creative group to include creative, cultural and recreation. That's in line with the Ministry of Culture and Heritage that funds creative, culture and heritage, which includes sport and recreation. So Sport New Zealand is funded through the Ministry of Culture and Heritage. If you run the numbers on those 7 groupings, you end up with these numbers here and here. But the big difference is this bottom grouping is incredibly dependent on volunteers who actually contribute to New Zealand Inc. but don't get paid for it, but need the same standards and training as everybody else nowadays. So we've been going around the country saying, what do you think of this? And the officials have said, oh, we didn't even think about volunteers. Perhaps they're worth having a think about. We'll give that some thought. And the various workshops we've had have been very clear that our group of industries are dependent on volunteers and New Zealand will fall over without them, and they need to be considered in the equation. So these are the groups, if you don't know, who are funded by Ministry of Culture and Heritage. We've gone to Culture and Heritage, we've gone to each of the CEs of these groups. They're all supportive of that collective group, including Sport New Zealand, who Jeff Barry's just walked in the room, as a GM at. And so all of those groups have said, yep, we believe that's where we should be and we shouldn't be part of the service industries. So there are some pros and cons. You might want to be in a grouping where you can sit next to the CEO of the warehouse or the CEO of Countdown because they've got lots of sway. The question is, how much sway will you have when you represent 3 people in your workplace? So there we are, that's the timeline, that's what's going to happen, it will happen. The only unknown is that in October 2020 there is a general election. And the National Party have said they don't like this and they're going to not have a bar of it, and they'll reverse it in certain ways. And that's why this legislation will pass by April 1 and we move with speed to get much embedded and irreversible as possible before October next year. And that was ROVE.